What's up, fellow music nerds? Matrix here, and you are locked into the Matrix Music Review Podcast, the only place to get your fix for your alternative music. And we are back with some more reviews. I got a couple of albums to talk about, a few singles. A bunch of tours were actually announced in the past couple weeks or so, so I definitely want to put those on your guys' radar. And then, obviously, next week when we get together on Wednesday, it is going to be a massive episode. I'm recording this on a Saturday, which I usually don't do. But yesterday there were about 7 albums released that we're going to have to talk about, so definitely looking forward to it, but it's going to be a big episode next week, so stay tuned for that. If it's your first time here with us, make sure you head on over to Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok and give us a follow at Matrix Music Review. Head on over to Spotify and like our playlist. It's Control-Alt-Save. It'll be linked in the description of this episode, as well as a few other playlists from some of my special episodes that we've had in the past. And as I always ask, if you're on Apple Music, Spotify, wherever you listen to us for the podcast, make sure you're leaving a 5-star review, give us a like, a thumbs up, leave us a comment, let us know how we're doing, and make sure that you're sharing it with your friends and your family so we can continue to grow our little community here. With that, we're jumping right into our reviews with the first album, and that was The Dark from the band CAMINO. Now look, this was a very interesting album to review. It's not one that I really expected to review, but after that first single, What Am I Missing You For, came out and I really connected with it, I felt like, you know what, let's at least give it a listen, give it a run through, and it was different. You know, it was definitely more on the simplistic side when it comes to lyrics, and the beats were very funky, and I feel like they just didn't match up. I feel like if some of the lyrics were more in depth or made you think a little bit more, I feel like I would have liked this album a little bit better. I didn't dislike the album, but it definitely was a little bit harder for me to fully get into it when it was a lot of these simplistic lyrics and simplistic themes that we went throughout this album. You know, there's kind of like this mini breakdown in the album opener, which is Told You So. And it's toward the beginning or towards the end of the chorus when this happens. And it's just not really something that you would expect from the band CAMINO. It's something that you'd really expect more from other bands that I've talked about in this specific alternative music scene. So I think the best way that I can describe this album is that it is a perfect example of what pop rock is. You know, this doesn't have a whole lot of our punk elements. There's definitely not any metal elements in this. This is a straight down the middle pop rock record that can definitely get radio airplay. It can definitely get some commercial appeal. But as far as if you're one of those people that's really into the pop punk side or you're really into the metal side, this album may not be for you. So looking at some of the tracks on here, Save My Life really has an anthemic sound to it. I can definitely see that being one at a show that people can sing back to them and one that they can kind of just really groove out to and really expect their fans to get into. But again, it's just these basic song titles, man, that really got me. You know, we have It's Not Me, It's You. We have Save My Life. We have Same Page. You know, these are all very simple, basic names and basic titles that you can kind of determine what this is going to be about before you even listen to the song. But with that being said, there is what I'm going to consider a word alert. And you guys know that I'm all about, you know, weird words, weird ways and weird twists to be putting on things. We did have a word alert in Same Page. And the word that they used in this song is enneagrams. And I'm going to be honest, I didn't even know what that was. I had to look it up. It was one of those words that when I was going through the lyrics, I was like, what the hell are they talking about? Where did this come from? And so that's what I'm talking about. If I had more of that from this album, I think I really would have enjoyed it a lot more. But it's basically saying that they're perfect on paper, but they're not on the same page in that song. So, you know, you get a word alert in there with enneagrams, but then you get to the chorus and it's like, we're just perfect on paper, but we're not on the same page. And, you know, yeah, it's a little bit of a twist, but for the most part, we've heard it done before. We've heard that phrase a lot. So kind of hard for me there. But then we kind of get, you know, 2 songs towards the end where I really see what I was looking for. Novocaine was a big standout for me. It's a funky beat. It's got heavier guitar riffs. It's got more complex lyrics in it. So you know that the band Camino can do it. You know that they have it in their arsenal. It's just a matter of why it wasn't introduced earlier in this. And then right after that, you get a song like 3-Month Hangover. You know, it's more in-depth lyric. That was what really drew me in for that song. So those final 2 songs, when I got to it, I was like, oh, this is what I've been looking for. This is where it's been. You know, I think overall, this album is a fine album. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's more just not my style. This is definitely not something that was memorable for me. It was not something that I'm going to come back to, except for those couple of songs that I really enjoyed. What Am I Missing You For? Novocaine, 3-Month Hangover. Those 3 songs really stood out to me and are some of my favorites that I've heard. So, you know, when you're looking at ratings, I think this probably has to sit in that 6.5 out of 10 range. Honestly, I think this is one that most of my listeners probably won't care for. But if you're somebody that's here and you really enjoyed like that Godsmack album that we talked about earlier this year, or even, you know, the Foo Fighters record, I think both of those are very similar to what the band Camino is trying to do here. And if you're looking for, you know, a little bit funkier side of beats, you'll definitely get that here. So this one might be for you. I think it's definitely worth a listen. If you haven't heard it yet, go check out The Dark from the band Camino. Next up, we got Reflections from Caskets. Second full-length album from Caskets, and I think this is a very strong addition to metalcore this year. I think Caskets is a band that really has their craft perfected, and I think this is just an even greater example of what they do so well. You know, in one of the songs, Believe, you get a line that says, "Physically, I'm broke, I'm engulfed, but I still cope." And this is kind of the complexity lyric-wise that I was talking about that we didn't have on that previous album from the band Camino that we have here with Caskets. So kind of going from one to the next, this is really what I was looking for and really helped me dive in and be right away drawn into this album. And one of the things I noticed with this Caskets record is that I'm finding myself realizing that 10 is the sweet spot. And what I mean by that is 10 songs on an album really is the sweet spot. I really was in the camp that 12 was the sweet spot, but I think now with all of the ways that we've gotten albums this year and all the different ones that we've gotten, I feel like 10 really is that sweet spot. Going on a track-by-track basis here, More Than Misery was a standout for me. I think that's probably going to be one that's linked in the podcast playlist. And when I started to look through some of these songs and I started to look through some of the lyrics and things like that, Reflections is such an appropriate title for this album. And I feel like once you dig deep, you kind of understand why they may have called this album Reflections. You know, most bands and most artists release an album and the album title is a track from their album. That's not the case here with Caskets. Caskets calls this album Reflections. And you get a very introspective album here from Caskets. They're always looking at losing themselves. They're always looking at, you know, bathing in suffering. And, you know, Silhouettes is a song that captures this perfectly. Silhouettes captures all of these pieces of reflection and kind of puts it right into one and puts it into one specific song that you can look at and say, okay, I get why this is called Reflections. You know, and I mentioned about bathing in suffering, and that's a line in one of those songs, but I think the term suffering is mentioned in almost like half of these tracks. You know, every track that I heard, there was some mention of suffering, and the only way to deal with suffering is to reflect on it and kind of grow from it. So again, we get that reflection piece built in there as well. You know, one of my favorite tracks on this record is 6 Feet Down, which has such a heavy, hard-hitting opening and has a line in it that says, "I can't breathe unless I'm 6 feet down, but will I find relief?" And that is just such a heavy lyric because what they're basically saying is, I won't be able to breathe until I'm dead, but even when I'm dead, will that even relieve what it is that's bothering me? Relieve that suffering. And that is just, that's a hard one to hear. You know, that's a hard one to think about, and it's definitely, you know, it's definitely one that makes you think. So, I mean, that's a heavy lyric from Caskets here. You know, and I think the last thing that I wanted to talk about with this album is that there's so much vocal variation that really made this stand out as well. And what I mean by vocal variation is that you get a ton of different variety here. You get the normal singing, softer vocals. You get a little bit of the screaming in there, but you also get what I'm considering like a straining, and you guys know what I'm talking about with that. It is, when it's just a little bit more, but it's not at that scream level, but it's still hitting that. It's a little bit more energy or emotion behind a lyric other than the lead singer just singing it, right? So overall, this record was really fantastic. I was super happy with it. I think this one's going to be about an 8.2 out of 10. It's a really strong entry for metalcore this year. If you have not checked it out yet, you guys need to go check out Reflections from Caskets. Next album up is Never Stood a Chance from Chad Tepper. This album right here is exactly why we can't have a specific definition of what alternative music is, because honestly, I can't tell you what genre this is from Chad Tepper, and that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. The word that I would use to describe this album is chaotic. And again, it's not a knock on it at all. That is actually what makes this album so fun, is the chaotic nature of the song titles, just the lyrics, all of it. I think the way I've thought about this album in particular is that, you guys know that I'm a pretty big fan of Jaden, and he's one of those artists that kind of helped me, be reintroduced to this pop punk and this Renaissance pop punk. Well, imagine if Jaden was a little bit more mature in his lyricism and had a little bit less Travis Barker production behind it. That's what you're getting here with Chad Tepper, and I love that. And that's what made this so much fun to listen to. Chad Tepper has some of the most fantastic song titles of the year on this album. We had Don't Make Me Get Naked Alone. We had I Wish I Was Better Looking. 777. 1-800 I Don't Know You Anymore. Like, there are just so many song titles on here that are like, what? And when you get into the song, you're like, oh, okay, now it makes a whole lot of sense. Like, Don't Make Me Get Naked Alone. It's a song all about trying to get a girl to go home with you and not being naked alone, but it's not as simplistic as you would think it would be. When you get into the lyrics, it's a little bit more complex than just like, hey, come home with me. I'm not trying to be naked alone tonight. Like, there's a little bit more behind it here. 777 was a very interesting track to me, because basically what he's saying is he went from down on his luck at 666 to high on life at 777. And it's just such a cool idea that we really don't hear. And that's what I talk about. These are the cool ideas. These are the cool lyrics. These are the things that bring people in. It's the creativity that really stands out and what makes albums set themselves apart from others. This isn't anything new from Chad Tepper. He's always been very creative as long as I've been listening to him and as long as I've been following him. But to get it in an album form with a bunch of this creativity, that was fantastic for me to get. The angsty lyrics and vocals from Chad on this are spectacular, but there are not all these angsty pop punk sounding songs. You also get a song like Light My Fire, which I would consider a very fun, lighthearted, danceable song that's, not necessarily in that pop punk range. It's probably more on the pop side, but it works because it's kind of like a palate cleanser in the middle of this album. It works really well. I think for me, favorite-wise, it's hard for me to pick a favorite on this one, because all of them had different endearing qualities for me, but I think I'm going to pick 1-800 I Don't Know You Anymore. I think it's just a classic pop-punk sound, and it's really what people could be looking for and really jonesing for with this renaissance that we've been seeing in pop-punk lately. If you haven't liked what some of your scene staples have been putting out, maybe try something new and fresh with something like Chad Tepper here. Overall, this album was really fun to deal with, really fun to listen to. I'm going to put it probably in like the 7.6 out of 10 range, which is a really strong number. You guys know I'm not very big on, going much past like 8 and 8 and things like that. So 7.6 out of 10 for Chad Tepper. This is definitely one that I'm going to be listening to a lot this year. If you haven't heard it yet, go check out Never Stood a Chance from Chad Tepper. And the last album that I'm going to talk about is an EP, and it's the debut EP, Elements from Imbalance. You guys know I've been looking forward to this EP for a while, ever since Imbalance shot onto my radar with Lost As I Am. The artwork on this album cover is spectacular. It's really fun to look at, and it was something that, again, it draws me in right away and gets me excited for it. And man, they did it. They kept the expectations right where I expected them to be. They produced an EP that was 7 tracks long that is spectacular. When we're looking at the title track, Elements, it starts out with a killer line. It says, "Never been too well adjusted to good intentions, but I don't trust them." And that's just kind of one, again, that makes you think and makes you sit there and go, oh, okay. And you get the elements in there as well. I'm feeling cold, touch turns to stone, like all these different things that is kind of elemental in thought. Like that's why this track is necessarily called Elements. And I love that. I love when you're not necessarily saying the word that is the title of your track. I love when you kind of have to make somebody think a little bit and dig a little bit deeper into the lyrics before you decide, oh, this is why it's called Elements or whatever it may be. You know, I've obviously talked about Leveled Out and Lost As I Am, so I'm not going to talk about them again. You guys can find that in old podcasts, but I am going to talk about a song called Blurry View because holy shit, what a lead-in instrumentally for that track. This is probably my favorite chorus on this, and maybe even my favorite song on this. And there's a final part in this song that's talking about like growing a conscious and always being influenced and having patience for months, and they're sick of settling. I mean, there's so much emotion that goes into that last little bit that really, really stood out for me. And, you know, overall, this EP is really just kind of a perfect blend of punk music, pop punk music. It really has some elements of skate punk in it as well, which I think is why I'm connecting with it so much. And it's just one of those refreshing debuts, right? Like this is kind of been the year of refreshing debut EPs, debut tracks from bands. You know, we had it last review podcast with People Are Ugly. We have it now with Imbalance. Even albums this year with debuts have been really solid. You know, we had Sam Hauge, we had Archetypes Collide. Like we have all these different bands and artists that are just bursting onto the scene. And, you know, with Imbalance, I think because they have this EP out now, it's such a good introduction to them and what their sound is and what their sound can be. I think they are what I'm going to say one of the best kept secrets right now. And, you know, selfishly, I kind of want them to remain that best kept secret because I really enjoy what they do so much. But at the same time, I think this band is just a matter of time before they blow up. I think it is just a matter of time before more people discover Imbalance and discover how much talent they have and how much potential they have to be really a force in the alternative music scene with the sounds that they're making. So this one was so much fun. One last thing on this EP. They ended this with 2 acoustic tracks for Leveled Out and Lost As I Am. And I love when this happens, right? I love when a band puts 2 acoustic tracks at the end of an EP because what this really allows is the talent to show through even more. I think a lot of times people think that pop punk, skate punk bands are really just these one-trick ponies where, you know, their vocals are overproduced and their vocals are, you know, kind of tuned to what they needed to be with the screams and the emotion and things like that. But when you strip it back and you let their acoustic guitars and everything take over, you hear that the vocals are just as talented as anything else. Like, this is why this genre is so much fun to review and so much fun to be a part of, because they have some of the most talented vocalists out there. It's just a matter of people understanding that, like, hey, it's not just these screams or vocals that sound like they're a little bit up-produced. No, you get the acoustics and you say, okay, wow, they really do have vocals and a voice that can, you know, stand right up there with anybody else. So, fantastic debut from Imbalance. I cannot wait to see the direction these guys take. Looking forward to it a lot. Rating for this one, you guys know I do EPs out of 5. It's a 4.7 for me. It's very close to being perfect. It's right there. So if you haven't heard it yet, the new EP from Imbalance, Elements, go check it out. That wraps it up for our albums this week. We're just going to touch on a few singles that I listened to that I just wanted to bring up, with the first one being Big Blind from The Story So Far. Glad to have The Story So Far back. It's been a while since I've seen or heard from them. It's a great return single for them. It's really got their classic energy, their classic sound, so I'm looking forward to what we get in the future from them. Big Blind from The Story So Far. Go check it out. Next track is Sickest Bitch from KILLBOY. This track has so much personality and such a great sound to it that I had to just mention it a little bit. I feel like this is an artist that hasn't really come up lately, at least not in my podcast reviews, so I'm excited to have KILLBOY on here. If you haven't heard it yet, go check out Sickest Bitch from KILLBOY. Next track is Generation Psycho from The Funeral Portrait. Really solid string of singles here from The Funeral Portrait with Alien, Creep, and now Generation Psycho. This is an anthemic song. This is easily a fan favorite song. I'm so happy that it's out and it's in the world for everybody else to hear. I think you guys are going to love this one. Go check out Generation Psycho from Funeral Portrait. The next one's a double up, and that is Bang by Broadside featuring Josh Roberts of Magnolia Park, and I Was Feeling Cute, Maybe I'll Delete by Fred from Magnolia Park. Look, the reason I'm putting these two together is because I'm actually a little bit concerned about Magnolia Park with the amount of output that they've had recently. Like, these guys are still finding time to do solo projects, and then this week released 2 new EPs. I don't think I've seen a band grind as hard as Magnolia Park has this year in a very long time, and it is so impressive because the output is so good. You know, even on the solo side of things, I mean, I've talked about Fred a few times. I've talked about Josh a few times. Like, Josh is on a few different songs this year as features. It's actually insane to look at the output that the Magnolia Park guys have done this year. It's insane. Both of these tracks are so much fun to listen to. If you haven't heard them yet, go check out Bang from Broadside featuring Joshua Roberts and I Felt Cute, Maybe I'll Delete from Fred. Next track is Drag Me Down from Loveless. Look, Loveless is a band that I kind of always forget how much I enjoy what they do, because we get a track like Drag Me Down and I'm like, yeah, this is the pop punk that I've been looking for. This is the sound that I've been looking for, and Loveless does it so perfectly that, you know, it just makes me anticipate more from them. So if you haven't heard it yet, go check out Drag Me Down from Loveless. Next track is Artificial from Daughtry. And I know you guys are probably thinking, what the hell are you doing talking about a Daughtry track? And honestly, I'm kind of concerned myself as to why I'm doing this, but I don't understand. Like, it was a track that was on, I think it was on All New Rock or All New Metal. I don't remember, but obviously Daughtry was not a scene staple for alternative music, but alternative music doesn't have a definition for us here at this podcast. So I took a listen, and honestly, I was really surprised at how much I liked this track. This was a little bit heavier than I would have expected from Daughtry, and the one thing with him that I think you can't deny is that the vocal talent is there. I don't think anybody can deny that he has a very strong voice. You know, I think you guys will like it. I think this is a track that kind of teeters on that hard rock metal edge, so we're going to put it on the playlist. Let me know what you guys think. Artificial from Daughtry. Go check it out. Next track is Gonna Get Better from Uninvited. This is my discovery of the week. I'm going to try to have at least one of those a week for you guys, as I've been talking about them so much. It seems like it's kind of standard to just add it into the podcast as like a small mini segment. So discovery of the week this week is Uninvited. They have such a great sound. I'm doing a little bit of a deeper dive into them in the past because I obviously have not heard much from them. You know, they have that classic pop punk sound, but if you're looking for a comparison, or at least for fans of, if you guys liked that track Unaware from South Arcade that I talked about a lot this year, this is right down that same alley, right down that same trajectory. So I think you guys are going to like this. Go check out Gonna Get Better from Uninvited. And the last track we're going to talk about is Worry Free from Free Friends and Glimmers. Solid collaboration here with such good lyricism in it as well. And Free Friends is becoming a band to watch for me. They're right on that edge with some of these other newer bands that I've talked about recently. They're right on that like friend circle vibe where, everything they're doing is really catching my attention. Everything they're doing is sounding really good. So the next step for Free Friends for me is to get, maybe an EP or a full-length album, because I think that's going to push them into that next level of popularity and that next level of everybody knowing who they are. The fact that they got a collab with Glimmers is great. I think that is a very strong sign that people believe in what they're doing, and I certainly do. I'm excited to see where they go in the future. So if you haven't heard it yet, go check out Worry Free from Free Friends and Glimmers. That wraps it up for our music review this week, but I got a bunch of tours to talk to you guys about real quick. The first one being Magnolia Park, going on a West Coast tour with Pop Tropica Sluts, TX2, and 408. If they're in your area, go check them out. I can't recommend Magnolia Park enough. I saw them earlier this year on Baku's Revenge, and it was a great time. Next tour is Story of the Year, is doing a 20-year anniversary run for Page Avenue, where they play it all in one night. And they're going to go on tour with 4 years strong We the Kings and Youth Fountain. Again, Story of the Year, saw them this year. They still got it. Go check them out. It's a great time. Taylor Acorn announced 7 fall headline dates for herself, and that is really encouraging for me. I think that is right along the lines of we may be getting an EP soon, which you guys know I have been clamoring for since the start of the year. Looking forward to that. The Main is going on tour with Floor, Weathers, and Daisy Grenade. And you guys will notice that I did not review the Main album, and that's because honestly I cannot for the life of me figure out what my feelings are on it. So it's a good album. That's about all I can say from it. I'm still trying to figure it out. If I get a chance, I'll loop it back in later in the year. But for this moment, I don't have much to say about it just because I've been listening to so much new music that's one that I've listened to several times and still can't get a read on it. So I just left it off for today. And then the last tour is Games We Play with Jutes and Ultra Q. That's a really interesting tour lineup. I'm going to see if they're in my area because that's definitely one I would love to go check out. 3 really interesting artists and a pretty solid tour lineup if you ask me. So if they're in your area, go check them out. That wraps it up for us here on the Matrix Music Review Podcast this week. I hope you guys enjoyed all these reviews. Definitely a slower week in terms of the amount that I had, but guess what, guys? Yesterday we had 7 new albums released that we're going to talk about, and I'm already halfway through most of them. Looking forward to talking about those because it's some fun stuff coming up with them. Head on over to Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok and give us a follow at Matrix Music Review. Make sure you are on Spotify, liking our playlist, Control-Alt-Save. It's where I add all of the music that we talk about on the podcast, as well as other songs that I'm listening to throughout the year. And head on over to Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave us a review, leave us 5 stars, thumbs up. Give us a comment, let us know how I'm doing here, and make sure you're sharing this podcast with your friends. Continue to grow our little community. It's actually insane to see how much you guys have liked some of the content coming out lately, and I hope to just continue to put out good content for you. As we always do, we are going to end our show on Spotify with a band playing us out, and you guys probably can guess where I'm going with this. This week, the band playing us out is In Balance with their song Blurry View. See you guys next week.